So you want to buy a dive watch, but you don't know which one to get. Whether you're looking at Omega and Tudor or just at Tudor dive watches, I've gotten hands-on with basically all of them that they have in their line. It's been kind of a thing that I focus on a lot, and I want to talk through each of the models and what would be a good fit for who, so we can break that down. Welcome to Wrist Swap. My name is Harrison. I have a preference for Tudor dive watches. Now, I've liked Tudor for a while, and I'll have videos going through watch collecting journey and all that good stuff, but I've liked them for a good amount of time now, and specifically within Tudor's dive watch collection, since they came back on the market in a big way in the US. That focus started with a dive watch, their Black Bay, which is kind of the one watch collection that they tend to focus the most amount of energy and time on. Even their dress styles are pretty close to their dive styles in the general layout. Then they also have their Pelagos line. So what I want to do is just briefly touch on each of those, my general experience with each of them in one comprehensive video, and what I think would be a good fit for each individual person. To break them down, the ones we're going to go through are going to be the Pelagos line, the 42, the FXD, and the Pelagos 39. Then we're going to talk about the Black Bay, the standard, the original Black Bay version, the Black Bay 58, and now the Black Bay 54. I've had hands-on with all 6 of those watches. I have dedicated reviews for the Pelagos, the FXD, the 39, the 58, and the 54. I do not have a dedicated review for the original Black Bay because I didn't like it very much. So we'll get into that. So the first thing I want to start with is the Pelagos line, go through those 3, and then get into the Black Bays. So the original Pelagos, as everyone knows, is a 300-meter dive watch. Now, that's overbuilt, and really what I think is lost a lot in general watch conversations is the fact that because it has a high water resistance does not mean that it itself is a more rugged watch. Okay, for example, let's say I have a sealed gasket around a motor. Because I work with motors in my everyday business, I have one that's IP69 rated and one that's IP67 rated. Basically, the only difference is infiltration into the case, but the overall force or thrust is the same. The shock resistance is the same. It just is the sealed gaskets and the way that those are presented. Now, I understand that that can be marketed very easily as a more rugged watch, and aesthetically, it is a more rugged looking watch. I would agree with that. It's a thicker case, it's a bigger case, all that stuff is correct, but it isn't itself a more rugged watch. The movement inside is the exact same. There's no like shock absorption system that's different in those than there is in the regular Pelagos line or in the Black Bay line for that matter. They're all generally the same movement. The only difference is the fact that it's got a higher water resistance. So case pressure is the only main difference, and no one dives to 300 meters. Going beyond 100 meters is an insane depth in general. So trying to go for a 300-meter diver is way overkill, but it's fun to imagine, and if that trips your trigger, I understand. Now, the overall aesthetic, I love. I love the original Pelagos. I wore it for part of my honeymoon. I loved it for a long period of time. Its design, I think, is more Tudor inspired than the Black Bay line, which we'll get into a little bit, mainly with the square indices. So the Pelagos is the OG. If you're looking for a thick, beefy watch, that is the way to go. The Pelagos FXD, on the other hand, is obviously a slimmer version, only coming on a NATO. It's got those fixed lugs, and it's got a countdown bezel. And I think, honestly, its shining characteristic in my mind is the countdown bezel because it is so utilitarian. There's a lot of use in a countdown bezel. And maybe that's just because I am late for everything. But when I used to own the Zen 104, which I miss dearly, I'm gonna make a video about some regrets in watch collecting, but I miss having a countdown bezel. It was one of the only ways that I stayed on time. I would make sure that I basically aligned it and then I counted down to when I needed to leave, and it told me that, rather than putting it on now and then counting up to 15 minutes because I have 15 minutes. It was much easier to know how much time I had left, and I need that to stay on time. You could just ask my wife. Now, that being said, I think the rubber strap was a little thicker than I wanted. I think the fixed lug concept is nice and cool, but I don't wear NATOs enough to need that. I like having the option for a separate rubber strap with regular lugs on a dive watch as well as a bracelet. I think a bracelet makes a watch in a lot of different ways. I mean, look at Grand Seiko. Most people love it, myself included, but I haven't bought one because I hate the bracelets, right? So That's kind of the general concept. So while I like the FXD, not for me, again, but if you're someone that likes the military-inspired nature of it, the Marine Nationale history of it, and you wanted a modern package, that is your watch. And the utilitarian aspect of a countdown bezel is rare in watchmaking, frankly. There's not that many countdown bezels, and it's really helpful. The Pelagos 39 is obviously my favorite of the entire batch, other than maybe the Black Bay 58. Those are pretty even with one another. But the Pelagos 39 is a modern Submariner. In my mind, it's what the Submariner should be. I mean, look at the Yachtmaster, for example. It's now in titanium. You could take that Yachtmaster and put it next to this Pelagos 39, and they're going to be very little difference between the two, other than obviously the name on the dial and some of the presentation, but the watch itself is going to be pretty similar. And the Yachtmaster is supposed to be an elevated Submariner, or Submariner for rich people who are on a yacht rather than on a submarine. And in my mind, the Pelagos is what the Submariner should be. This is what it should look like in a Tudor lineup, with the square markers, the size, even with the ceramic bezel being a little reflective at moments with the satin finish on the top and how it goes out. You know, when I got this, I knew that I was going to really love it. I knew it fit everything that I wanted out of it, but I've been surprised at how much it would be very difficult for me to let it go, even to the point where I might have, if I had to pick between this and my Speedmaster, which I miss, and someone handed me both, I might have picked this. It's just so useful in my life, I don't think about it. And I think that's really valuable in a watch for me and my profession. So if you're someone that wants basically a modern take on the Submariner with a Tudor name on the dial, this is your watch. I will say the 21mm Lugowitz is a little bit of a disappointment. I wish it was 20, but you know, this is a 20mm band and I don't care. The Black Bay line, if you're really not worried or interested in the utilitarian aspect of the Pelagos line and that more dull gray shape and look of the case, because everything's brushed and everything's just, you know, that grayish titanium. If you're looking for a little bit more flash, a little bit more pizzazz, especially if it's going to be an everyday style watch that you want to dress up a little bit, you're going to have a really hard time dressing up a Pelagos. It's just not meant to do it because it looks so utilitarian. That gray color does not help it. So if you're looking at something that's more of a go anywhere, do anything watch, definitely look at the Black Bay line. It's going to be more of that. It's also going to feel more refined just because it has those polished aspects to it. And it's going to feel more glamorous, for lack of a better word. So from that lineup, you have the original Black Bay that came out. Now, I'm not a huge fan of this one. Everyone calls it slab-sided. I would call it slab-sided as well. It's very fat on especially the left-hand side of the case because there's nothing to break it up. It just looks like a lot. It wears heavy, it wears top heavy. I'm not a huge fan. The design was unique at the time, but I wouldn't wear one nowadays. I know they have an updated one with the METAS certification. I have not gotten hands-on with that to see how different it is, but I still would prefer a very thin case. If you like a chunky watch for a go anywhere, do anything watch, that's an everyday watch, then that's you. You know, that's great, that's perfect for you. If you're someone that wants something that's a little slimmer, you're not gonna notice it as much, you're gonna start moving into the 58 and the 54. So the 58 is gonna be for someone that wants a watch that is basically go anywhere, do anything, you know, wear it through and through, wear it every day. It's got some vintage elements that kind of harken back, whether you go blue or black. I think the black is definitely more vintage inspired and the blue is much more modern, especially in the colors presented on the dial, as well as the bezel itself. The red triangle at the top does set it off for more of a vintage flavor. If you take the bracelet off, especially, and put it on a different strap, it really looks like a modern watch, a lot less than a vintage inspired. The rivets do help it look a little bit more vintage inspired. That being said, I think the 58 is obviously an all-around great watch. Most people, you know, rave about it, myself included. I owned it for, I guess, about 8 or 9 months. My wife loved that watch. It wasn't her favorite. It's still the Speedy. I have not been able to top that yet, but she really liked it and she would wear it every so often because it fit her and it also fit me. And that was different because she didn't really wear any of my other watches up until that point, until that one came out. So I think that one's really good because it bridges the divide in a lot of ways. A man can wear it and a woman can wear it very easily. 54 even more so, obviously, with the woman, but you know, some men can't wear the 54 because they don't feel comfortable with the case size. But the 58, I think, is just, it is what it is. Everyone raves about it for a reason. If you're really looking at something like that, I prefer the black dial over the blue one, but you know, preferences are what they are. Everyone has a different one. So that's kind of my take on the 58. Again, if you're looking for something you're gonna wear every single day and has a little bit more pizzazz to it, that feels refined and feels a little bit more elevated, like you could wear it with a dress shirt or a suit, you're definitely gonna wanna go that route as opposed to any of the others. It's gonna slip under a cuff a lot better, but I don't dress up. So again, that's why I don't have mine anymore. And my Explorer was already doing that function for me, which is why I went for the Pelagos 39 as opposed to the 58. So that's kind of the difference. That's why I switched over into the Pelagos line from the 58 line. Now, if you like the 58, but you wanna go even more vintage inspired, and you also, or you also just want a slimmer, smaller case, you're gonna go to the 54. And I was surprised at how much I liked it. You know, I have very limited experience, I should say, with mid-size cases, with something from 36 to probably 37, maybe 38 millimeters in a dive watch. I have very little experience with that. And I actually liked it quite a bit, you know. It was cool because, you know, it still had presence. Did notice things about it. I said this in my review, but one of the biggest things that stood out to me was I noticed the lugs more on that watch than on any other watch I've ever owned, because they were longer lugs, that is true, but also because the dial was smaller, it gave you more time, or visual space, I should say, to recognize the whole architecture of the case. You know, from the lugs, from the top of the lugs to the bottom of the lugs, rather than just a dial, and see those as adders. So I thought that was really unique. And the other thing that I thought was really cool about that watch was the bezel and the fact that they lost those hash marks on there and dropped the triangle back down to a regular white triangle. Honestly, I think for whatever reason, it could be the font too, but it really felt vintage inspired. Like it actually looked like an old watch because it was missing those. And I think they also changed the font. You correct me if I'm wrong about that. But either way, all that stuff makes it even more vintage inspired and even more like forget about it. You put it on, it's gonna vanish, you know, at the same amount as the 39 here. If you want something that's more glitzy, more glamorous, but you wanna, you know, put it on, wear it, and just let it, you know, vanish until you catch it and enjoy it, then that would be kind of a good fit for you. I have people ask me all the time for advice. I'm looking at this or this, and I think setting up relatively rigid lines to see what is what and why I would pick one or the other tends to help. And I try to send that in a message when people ask me, but it's hard to delineate. So I want to do it in a video, make it a little bit more straightforward. Hopefully this helped. If you have any other comments or reasons why you picked one over the other, leave them down below. Do me a favor and subscribe. Thanks again for 10,000 subscribers. Never thought we would get here. But the more people we have on board, the more we can have a straightforward, honest piece of the watch community where I'm not going to just hype something up because someone specific released it. I'm either going to like it or not, and we'll talk about it honestly and how it wears and functions on an everyday basis. I'll see you in the next one. Take care.